Välkomna allesammans. Vi ska träffa en gäst här. Welcome, Aron Pilhofer. We're going to hear from one of the most prestigious, not to say trendy, news brands of today's media world, The Guardian. Formerly a Manchester-based morning paper, now a global news brand with a huge presence in Australia and the US as well. Owned by the Scott Trust, which invests heavily in journalism, investigative journalism, notably with stories such as the phone hacking scandal and the Edward Snowden story. Some of your colleagues we've met at what we call Almedalsveckan a couple of years before, invited by Swedish radio. We had Nick Davis, the reporter who broke the phone hacking story from The Guardian, visiting Visby, and last year we had your managing editor Paul Johnson, and now you are here. So you're in a tradition of Guardian editors coming to Sweden to tell us. And we have, I can tell you, we have like a prestigious crowd as well. We have the Director General Hanna Stjärne. She is heading the Swedish National Television, the BBC equivalent. We have Erik Fichtelius, who is head of the educational company, the Utbildningsradion, and a number of newspaper editors. So they are eager to listen to you. Great. And you're also, I was told, you are the manager of Helena Bengtsson as well.
Yes.
Helena is a well-known investigative journalist, a data journalist. She's with Swedish Television, but she's been working at the New York Times with you, and you have now recruited her, which includes her horse, I know.
Her horse made
Her
it.
horse
Yep,
is in the UK as well.
Yep.
So you are going to tell us now about your work at the New York Times and The Guardian.
Yep.
And there will be opportunities for questions in like 30 minutes or so. So
Yep.
give a big hand to Aron Pilhofer.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So I love coming to Scandinavia. It's my second trip to Sweden. I've been to the Norway version of this conference. Or I should probably say this is, my good friends from that conference are here, so I probably just completely stepped in it. But it's an amazing event. It brings together so many people from different parts of media. I tried to turn this talk into something that would appeal to everybody, and that didn't work at all. So I just decided to sort of talk about and focus on what we're doing at The Guardian and why I'm there. So hello, that's me. I used to work there. I now work there. And, I've spent a lot of time in what you could think of as kind of old traditional media. I'm a newspaper person by training and background, and about 10 years ago I went and switched a pretty dramatic shift to the digital. And why I did that in part, and why this is a career path for someone like me is probably most indicative of that, which is this is US based, but this is what's happening to my industry and what's going on with newspaper, particularly print advertising. And classifieds, which is the lower bar. And, the news doesn't necessarily get better for sort of the traditional legacy platforms. As most of you know, more and more people, particularly younger people, are getting their news on the internet in other digital forms, not traditional newspapers. And this idea of disintermediation, where news travels to you, where you're not going to a destination site also. If you look at it by age, this again is from Pew data, this is US based, but similar to what's going on around the world. More and more young people are getting their news via social and other channels. So, that old model of the sort of destination is kind of falling apart. And that's the landscape that the New York Times, and in particular The Guardian, finds itself in. And I think nothing exemplifies the reality more than this picture. This was actually on my way to Norway recently, and I just snapped this because I thought it was really, really interesting. This is a Piccadilly line. What do you notice about what's going on there? Well, that is the number of electronic reading devices people are using, and you can see 2 printed newspapers, one of which is a free evening paper. That's the challenge. That's why we have to adapt. So that's why I've kind of titled this talk trying to reboot or relaunch a 200-year-old startup. The Guardian's actually 193, but it doesn't sound good to say 193-year-old startup. So this is part of what's going on right now within The Guardian. When I got there in September, it was a pretty traditional structure. It was a news desk. There was a web a separate web operation that was attached, and a separate print operation. And they worked pretty well. It worked in tandem, a very traditional sort of operation. This is kind of the new revised version of The Guardian. So we have a news desk which runs, daily coverage, business, international, national news. But the lime green is new. That's a live desk. That's the desk that is fundamentally thinking about now, today, what's going on this moment. They have a lot to do with our live blogs. They have a lot to do with promoting. And then the lower left, a planning desk is new as well. And that's the desk that kind of looks out for not today, but what's coming down the road. So what this structure kind of gives us, at least those 4 squares, is the ability in a sort of platform-neutral way to think about what's happening now, what's happening later, and how to bring that all together within our coverage, within our existing desk structure. The lower right-hand corner there, the visuals and audience, that's kind of my world. Guardian, when I got there, had a graphics desk, a fairly traditional graphics desk. It was very talented, run by very talented graphics, an editor, Kath Levitt. We also had an interactive team. The graphics desk was doing about 95% print, or print first, and the interactive team obviously was about 100% digital. They sat right next to each other. They barely spoke. That was sort of indicative of how print and digital were working. So the very first thing I did was combine those 2 operations under one editor. That's Kath. So we now have a combined graphics and interactive team. And then I brought in other elements. The picture desk, both print and digital, was moved into what I started to call Guardian Visuals, and I'll explain that in a minute. So the picture desk is part of the operation. We brought in a piece of the video team, which is the piece that does interactive documentary, and I'll show you some examples of that work later. And then a piece of the design team is embedded in this team as well. So in terms of skills, you're bringing together photographers, you're bringing together videographers, you're bringing together documentarians, you're bringing together coders, you're bringing together graphic artists, you're bringing together data visualization specialists, all of these skills under one umbrella that I'm calling Guardian Visuals. And the other part is audience, and I'll talk about that a little more detailed later, but audience and analytics, that's actually 2 teams that I started. And there's a 3rd team that I'll mention in a minute called Data Projects. But that's pretty much my world. Now, getting back to visuals, the inspiration for that, and I have to give credit where credit is due, is National Public Radio. I had the good fortune between June and September. I actually started at The Guardian in June, but I didn't actually move over there until September. I had the good fortune of being able to spend that time visiting newsrooms, talking to a lot of people, both in and out of traditional news organizations. Visited the Washington Post, BuzzFeed, all these sort of startups. And I was looking for models because I knew if our goal was to become an organization that was truly digitally led, we couldn't use the existing desk structure that we had. A sort of traditional structure doesn't work. So I wanted to look at other models, and the model that I came upon that just seemed exactly right was National Public Radio. I even borrowed the name. Brian Boyer there is the editor of NPR Visuals. Shakeen GV is our editor of Guardian Visuals, so credit where credit is due. Here's a more expanded view of the total team. So I have social community, that's part of audience and analytics, and then data projects, that's Helena. And then over there is visuals. So that's kind of the totality of the team. And so why would you do this? Why would you take a newsroom, jumble it up like this, and why would you invest in these kinds of skills? What's so important about visual journalism? Well, in my opinion, innovation isn't a turnkey solution. And so what I mean by that is a lot of publishers, and I'm not going to name names, I've worked for them before, a lot of publishers think innovation just simply means some kind of thing that you can bring in out of the box, plop into the newsroom, and suddenly, boom, you're innovating. Well, it just doesn't work that way. Which of these companies, which successful startup, internet startup do you know that has been founded on the foundation of a turnkey solution? None of them. They're all building their own code. They're all building their own IP. They are all mastering the medium. So that's one reason to do this, because we can never be truly digital unless we are truly digital. The other reason actually is this. So this is the list of most read items from last year's New York Times. And this is the number of them, half, those that were either interactives of some kind or some form of visual journalism. So half, including number 1, 3, 5, 8, and 10. I want to call out this piece. Has anybody seen this before? This is one that is really interesting. This is the most read piece of content in the history of nytimes.com by orders of magnitude. It blew away the Boston bombings, it blew away 9/11, it blew away everything. Oh, that's terrible. I didn't mean it like that. That was really unfortunate. Moving on. This is a piece that we launched, that the graphics desk actually did, and they launched it in November of 2013. So not only is it the most read piece of content in the history of NY Times, it was the third most read piece of content a year and a half after it was launched. And that's the power of visual journalism. That is the power of these kinds of things. And if we're looking to try to achieve some level of digital fluency, some level of digital reach, of transforming what we do in the digital context, we have to be fluent in these kinds of technologies, and that's why we should do it. Another good reason is we just simply need to use all the colors on our palette. And what do I mean by that? Good enough isn't necessarily good enough when it comes to visuals. So whether it's this is just sort of give you a sense of the range, whether it's something relatively simple like this, where you're taking a complex issue and creating a sort of a visual flowchart to help readers understand it better. Or something like that, where Tesco is a big supermarket chain, and they were about to close a bunch of locations around the country, but what does it mean? And so we put together an interactive graphic that explains not just where those things are closing. Originally, this was just going to be dots on a map, but we decided, no, we needed to do some more reporting. We turned it into much more than that. Here's the First World War piece. This is a piece of interactive documentary that involves sound and video, and it allows the reader to kind of choose their own path through the content. This is a piece that Fran Panetta did. It's fantastic. We want to be better on the visual front because we need to. We need to explain to readers what they're seeing. So here's this. We just launched this. An election in the UK is a very complex, confusing thing. Not as complex or confusing as Sweden, but it is a complex and confusing thing where you have like 722 parties. Here we only have like 8 or 9. But we try to sort of explain visually what people are seeing, what do these polling results mean, and not just what the numbers are, but what they could mean in terms of actual, what is the representation in Parliament. Visual journalism means taking photography and doing something with it. This is a piece we did around the 70th anniversary of Auschwitz. This is not our photos, but they were so moving that we just couldn't put them in a slideshow and call it an afternoon. So we built this kind of viewer where you can go through, scroll down and see not just the image, but then the smaller image of them as a younger person, as a child. These are all survivors. On the slightly more feature-y front, this is a piece we did for the Oscars. We did a number of these. These are our images. We set these up. These are all Oscar winners who you probably don't know had won an Oscar. They're relatively unknown people. And they wrote a piece like this, and they had the images. And when we went to the magazine, which is a treasure trove, an absolute treasure trove, when we went to the magazine to talk about this piece, they were just going to pop it into an article and call it a day. I mean, they wanted to do more with it, but they didn't have the capability to do more with it. So we built this. Guantanamo Diary is a project we did with Canongate Books. This is the story. This is actually a book written by Mohamedou Slahi, who's currently sitting in Guantanamo. It's the first manuscript to ever get out of Guantanamo, to be declassified and published as a book. And obviously, as you can see down there, heavily redacted. we wanted to do more there than just sort of present the manuscript, so we did a video. So I'm hoping sound will work, so we'll see in a minute. We do a lot with motion graphics also, and so this is an example.
The cell, better the box, was cooled down to the point that I was shaking most of the time.
This is Dominic West.
For the next 70 days, I
from the Wire.
Interrogation 24 hours.
And he's reading the manuscript. We ended up getting. I'm going to stop this.
There's no reason for Mohamedou to be in Guantanamo.
This is the Guardian's Guide to Scottish Independence.
That's coming. That was Dominic West reading. We ended up having like a star-studded cast of people who volunteered to read chapters of the book, and we didn't quite know how to treat them, so we thought, trying to sort of, we had no visuals, obviously, so we sort of took the descriptions and turned them into that animated piece, which I think was really powerful and quite lovely. On the other side, goofier side, this is a piece we did around the Scottish referendum. I didn't commission this. This came from the multimedia team, and it worked incredibly well. This actually taught us a little bit of a lesson. We have this kind of a meme going, or a rubric for non-Brits. We have an enormous audience internationally, quite large, and often news from the UK kind of blows up into a national thing. And a lot of times, people outside the UK just simply don't understand why, or they don't understand what the heck is going on. Such was the case with the Scottish referendum, which was not really a big news story until the very last month, or the last few weeks, when the yes and no sides, according to polling, dramatically closed to the point where there was an actual real chance that Scotland would vote for independence. And it became a bigger issue. And so we needed to explain this, so we created this video for non-Brits.
For the non-Brits.
It's a long and complex story, but let's begin by answering the most fundamental question. Where is Scotland anyway? The country of Scotland is right here, at the top of the island of Great Britain, the crazy hat worn by the bearded troll who appears to be looking west toward Ireland and laughing.
Okay, you get the idea.
On Thursday, the 18th of September.
Yeah, you get the idea. It's a kind of a goof. It's a kind of a simple thing. It did incredibly well. This is the kind of content that travels incredibly well on social, in particular. But it's the sort of piece that I think for us worked really, really well because it played to our global audience. While in some ways a lot of the streams of this came from UK IP addresses, so I kind of think a lot of the people who watched this and learned from it were actually British, and may not have been so fully up to speed on this as maybe we thought. But this is something that I think we're going to do a lot more of, particularly around the election and other incidents. Plus, with our offices in Australia and the US, we're considering doing the reverse, where it's when issues blow up in the US, and doing it for non-Americans or doing it for non-Australians. This is another piece. Oh, I want to explain this before we. So we do. No. All right. Stop. One other thing we're trying to do on the video side is to try to understand what video means for a traditional news organization. And my team has a piece of that. We're helping out. We have a brilliant editor, Merritt B. Mills, who runs our video team. And she is one of the smartest, most creative people I've ever met and comes up with these incredible ideas. And a lot of the video we produce is similar to what a lot of news organizations produce. It's basically off the news. And those video pieces can travel very well with an article as kind of related content. But Merritt B has a bunch of ideas for doing original video pieces that live on their own, that stand on their own, that aren't part of an article series. And she, when she was editor of the magazine, created this column, which is one of my favorite columns in The Guardian, which is Blind Date, where we put two strangers together on a blind date, and then they get together afterwards and we interview them and they talk about one another. It's a great feature, but she's always wanted to do something in video. And she finally found a way to do it, and I'll just play it because I think you'll see what the conceit is so good. It's called Watch Me Date.
Oliver, Irina. Hi, nice to meet you too. Hi, I'm Oliver Tully. I'm 37 years old. I'm from Hong Kong, and I'm an events manager.
Hi, I'm Irina. I'm years old. Oh, God, I can't say that. Do I really have to put my age down? I'm at an age where I should be married and having kids. That's probably why my age is a slight issue.
What I need and what I want usually is, I'm only going to find that in someone who's close to my age, really. But I really want somebody in their mid-20s. I'm telling the truth, actually. I'm just being honest.
I'm hoping that there's a spark and some chemistry.
So what nationality are you?
I'm half
So you
Russian,
get the
half
idea?
Wow, that's
Yeah.
interesting.
And what are you?
I'm English.
All right, is this going to win a Pulitzer Prize? No, it's not. But it's what a great idea, right? You do a blind date where they're both wearing Google Glass, and you can kind of like go along with them. There's a scene in this particular one, which was last week's, that is absolutely priceless, where they're talking about the server, and she says, "Yeah, and I think he really liked the server, maybe more than me." And you can see from his point of view, just go whoop right to it's fantastic. But what do you do with something like this? How do you build an audience around something like this? So normally what we would do is put it into a page like that, which is our sort of standard video page, which is fine for standalone videos, but this is actually a series. And on the right there, you can see there's completely unrelated stuff. How do you do something like this when it's a series? And so that's kind of what we did here. We launched this a few weeks ago with the specific intent of creating kind of a hub and a home and trying to build an audience around this. So here we have a teaser to next week's. We're always teasing the next week's one. Here we're getting people to sign up to sort of subscribe like you would on like iTunes. And then you can play each video right there on the page. That's the whole idea behind it. This is a pretty recent project for us, so I couldn't tell you right now if it's working or not, but this is one of those things that only if you've got the right combination of designers and developers and coders and videographers you can do. Another reason to do this. All right, social. Journalism should be a conversation. I ran the social media team at the Times. I run the social media community team at The Guardian. The Guardian has had a long track record for being very progressive when it comes to social. Comments, everybody likes to talk about comments. That's only one form of it. I would advocate people think much more broadly. One example of that is Witness. We have a platform called Guardian Witness where you can actually put up assignments, ask people to send photos or things like that. So here is an example of one. This is a project from our cities. That's what a contribution call out might look like. Some of them are kind of fluffy, like weather, but some of them are actually very serious, like this project around the shootings in Paris, or in this project where this is part of a series I did in the US where we were soliciting reader feedback on the issue, on the question of mental health. And finally, well, not finally, but also, we also need to know, in order, once we've made all this investment, we're doing these things, we have to know, are they actually working? And that's kind of key, because organizations like this one and this one, they actually do know. Baked into their platform is a very, very sophisticated suite of analytics. They know exactly, and that one too even, they know exactly what they're trying to achieve and why. And that's something that newsrooms are not really used to, particularly on the traditional side. They're just not used to setting goals. They're not used to measuring things in that way. And this is a piece in Medium, about Medium, which is an amazing platform, explaining why they feel so strongly about changing the discussion about metrics. They actually came up with their own metric called total reading time. They don't care as much about page views or uniques. They care about total reading time. That's what they think is going to drive their business. And I love this paragraph because I think you could take out every web company and put in every news organization, it would be the same. That every news organization should have some not so bullshit metrics that guide the business and provide an indication of its health. Yeah, we absolutely should. So how do newsrooms currently do metrics? I mean, for the most part, it's that. We sort of create content, we throw it on our homepage, and we hope. That tends to be our approach to this, and I'm arguing that we need a more sophisticated approach. This is from the New York Times. This is a piece that we built, or this is an internal tool that we built called Package Mapper, which helped track like how people flow through packages of content, whether we at the Times recognize them as a package and deliberately link them together, or whether readers identified them as a package and were just flowing through related content. And it would tell you whether something was a dead end, which meant that traffic was going in, and there was obviously nothing to draw people to continue, or whether something was giving a ton of traffic, like you can see there, giver plus 16%. Is that part of the page, this is not actually a section front there or a home page, but that piece of content was actually acting like a home page at that moment. And so you could see this kind of in real time, what was actually going on the site. This is Fish Finder, another NYT tool we worked on. Fish Finder would help you do what a marketer would call audience segmentation, but in real time. We'd use a tool like this to say, okay, we're about to launch a project called Upshot, which is our answer to Nate Silver's 538 blog. Where's that audience? Where do we find an audience for Upshot on our site? Well, I don't know. I mean, an obvious place to start would be former readers of Nate Silver's 538 blog. So where are they? Do they still exist? What do they also read? That might lead you sort of thinking in terms of strategy to build an audience around something like Upshot, would lead you in a very different direction. If you knew, for example, that Nate Silver readers tend to read technology and sports, right, as opposed to international and national news. This is OFAN, which is a Guardian platform. It's been written about extensively. It's an amazing tool. It gives you basically real-time analytics down to the asset level, down to the article level, and it can tell you all sorts of useful things. It's an amazing gift. This was developed at first as a Hack Day project, and then it became institutionalized over time. Every reporter in The Guardian has access to this. We don't have to debate that question at The Guardian. We allow everybody to see data, which I think is the right way. So we have all this data. How might we start using it in a more targeted way, in a better way? So here's an example. Emmys versus World Cup. Here's two interactive projects. One upper left, that's the Emmys. It's a bracket. Every week you vote, and then those two shows, whichever one gets the most vote, they go head-to-head, and the winner moves up. Another week, vote, head-to-head, move up, and then finally you end up with a winner. Bottom right, that's a piece around the World Cup where you could pick your fantasy team and then play a virtual game with one another, and you could see who would win. Well, how'd they do? So let's look at our traditional metrics. Emmys on the left, World Cup on the right. Pretty obvious, right? Boom. It's pretty obvious who won, or was it? So let's look at the details. Emmys versus World Cup. Emmys, 97,000 page views. That's not a lot. It's a relatively modest amount, but 23,000 votes. So the conversion rate there, meaning page views converted to a vote, 24%. That's pretty darn good. We did email reminders similar to Watch Me Date around this, and 3,300 people signed up to be reminded when the next round of voting was open. Of those people, 47 to 56% opened those emails, and 30 to 44%, depending on which version we sent them. We did some A/B testing. Would actually click through to come back to vote. Also, pretty darn good if you ask anybody in the industry. World Cup, 10 times the page views, no doubt about it. But 84% were anonymous, meaning, what do you do? The problem with this interactive in part was that you had to log in basically to do anything. So what did that mean? 81% just simply went away of that number. 10% either tried to log in or register and just gave up somewhere along the way and went away. So what did that leave? That left a very tiny number of people who actually used this interactive, actually engaged with it. So which one actually won? I think you could actually construct a pretty reasonable argument that Emmys, in some ways, was a more successful project than the World Cup. And so finally, my last point is this, that we can do all of this. We can look at data. We can provide reporters data. We can look at our competitors. We can look at competitors outside journalism. We can look at other technology companies. We can forge different relationships with the business side. We can do all of this and maintain our core values, which is essential. And this is a quote from Ezra Klein. It's a quote that kind of, in some ways I agree with, but in some ways it bothers me. When he left the Washington Post to go to Vox, or to found Vox.com, he said this, that at the Post they were held back not just by technology, but by the culture of journalism, which is to say the culture of a legacy newsroom. And that bothers me because it means that culture itself could be the problem, or part of the problem. I'm not sure I agree with that. I think that part of the biggest problem, to be quite frank, is taking the culture we already have, taking the values we already have in newsrooms, and helping people make that transition, build that bridge from the traditional approach, from the legacy platform to the new platform. And so often reporters will ask me, like, so what is it? What skills do I need to have? What do I need to do in order to succeed in this, when we move to this sort of digital environment? And the answer I give is not, you don't have to go and learn to code, you don't have to learn, it'd be great, I would love that. That'd be fantastic if you went and learned all that stuff. But don't jump to that. Really, it's an open mind. That's what I tell them. I just want you to have an open mind. What that means is when you have this amazing story, I don't want you to assume that that story is going to end up being a 1,500, 2,000, 2,500 word inverted pyramid style news story in the traditional sense. I want you to assume nothing. I want you to go and come to us immediately and let's talk about what that story might be. It might end up being a traditional story, but it might not. It might end up being something like the NSA Decoded, which is very much a not traditional story, written, by the way, by a very traditional reporter. The other piece of great news is this, that the skills that we have in newsrooms today, great reporting, great editing, great storytelling, guess what? All of those things translate brilliantly to digital. Arguably more important in a digital environment where good information and bad information are often as easy to find. Those things are as important as they ever have been, and will continue to be. And so thank God. I mean, that's kind of the good news. That's very lucky. And so whenever I talk about print versus digital, I have to end with this, which is maybe my cheesiest slide ever in the history of Keynote. But I have to make this point, and if you tweet anything, please make it this. Because a lot of times when people talk print and digital, it seems like it's a print versus digital, and it's not. These things are not in competition. The only thing that we're in competition with is something a lot more vague, something like market forces, right? That's really what we're trying to combat here. And so when I say our future is a team sport, I mean it. I mean that everybody needs to come along for the ride. And I do truly believe that we can all do this together. So thank you.
Thank you, Aron. Being the executive editor of Digital at Guardian, you are blessed with like a huge
Should
operation.
I come over there? Oh,
no,
sorry.
you can come wherever you go.
Okay.
You have like a huge organization, and many of the editors and executives in this room, they represent much smaller, like regional newspapers, smaller. What would be your small organizations? What would be your what will you look at first if you were put in charge of a much, much smaller team, digital team than the one you possess today?
Right. So I'm asked that a lot, is, where do you begin? What do I do if I'm in a small newsroom? There's a few answers to that. One is start. Just start somewhere. Even if it's one developer, one graphic artist, someone, just start. Bring these sort of visual storytellers into the newsroom. Probably these people exist somewhere in your organization, and more than likely on a different floor. More than likely they're tucked into a corner somewhere. Geography is super important. Putting them next to journalists, that's important. Number two, you've got to find somebody within your organization who can help you kind of steer, who can steer both of those, who can make sure those things go in the same direction. You can't just take a developer, chuck that person into a newsroom and expect magic to happen. You need to have somebody there who kind of understands both worlds, or who can understand both worlds. Sometimes that person is a traditional journalist, sometimes that person is not. And you don't have to start huge. WNYC in New York is a very traditional newsroom. I mean, that's public radio. It doesn't get much more traditional than that. They have a 7-person interactive team, but it didn't start with 7 people. It started with 3. And actually, it started with 1. And they do some of the most groundbreaking work in the business in a 50-person newsroom. So you can do it. You can do it at any size. You just sort of have to start doing it. And quite frankly, a lot of people come up to me and they say, well, we can't afford it. We don't have this. We don't have that. And that's true. It involves a commitment. But from my point of view, those numbers that I'm looking at, those ad figures, we're all seeing roughly the same thing happening, maybe not as dramatic as that. I don't know that we can afford not to. That would be my argument.
You mentioned that you discovered a fairly traditional desk structure when you came to The Guardian, but having been also the editor of Interactive at the New York Times, I'm sure many in this room are familiar with the well-known New York Times Innovation Report. What did you learn in terms of like decision making? When you came to The Guardian, did you discover similar problems?
Yeah, The Guardian and The Times are very similar in some ways and very different in others. I mean, The Guardian, The Times, I think, print casts a much larger shadow over the newsroom than at The Guardian. The Guardian is, I think, much more digitally oriented out of the box right now anyway than The Times. And I think that's by virtue of the kinds of ways that those organizations have evolved. Mm-hmm. The Times circulates 1.2 million newspapers a day. It's a pretty, yeah, that's a lot. They still produce a big fat Sunday paper. That's a lot. The Guardian is 6 days a week. The Observer is Sunday. That's a completely separate operation, but Guardian is 6 days a week. The circulation of The Guardian is roughly 150, 200,000 a day, so there's a huge difference there. But in terms of reach digitally, we're 120 million global uniques, which is right up there with the New York Times. So I think that's part of it. The Guardian is a little more digitally oriented in that way. Culturally, they're very similar. It's very mission-driven newsrooms. It's a destination newsroom. It's filled with brilliant reporters, brilliant editors, and storytellers. Both newsrooms are willing to take risks. Both newsrooms recognized early on the need to transition digitally. I think The Guardian may be slightly ahead in some ways than The Times, but I think The Times is way, way, way farther along than you might have thought based on that innovation report.
Was it not fairly?
Oh, the innovation report was fair. I think I would argue with some of the details of it, but the conclusions I think were basically right. But keep in mind that the innovation report wasn't written in order to all the good stuff that the Times has done, and there's a lot, were deliberately kept out of it. I mean, Greg Sulzberger, who wrote it, very deliberately focused on the things that the Times wasn't doing particularly well. So you might get the misimpression. It wasn't meant to be comprehensive.
Some 10 years ago, many in our industry were intrigued by a Danish regional paper called Nordjyske. We all went there to see their desk structure, and a couple of years ago, many went to the Daily Telegraph to see their fantastic newsroom.
The hub in the
Incredible.
Yeah.
But now many of us are like fascinated by The Guardian. It's no coincidence that you are here. But where do you look? When you look for inspiration, where do you look?
Well, I told you, I looked at National Public Radio of all places for the visual piece, because I thought that was, their model was good because it allowed me to preserve the sort of vertical desk structure that we needed. So photo, graphics, interactive, those desk structures need to exist. But it allowed us to create this layer above it where we could easily assemble cross-functional teams to do big projects. Like, we could easily put together a 4 or 5 person team, a coder, a designer, a developer, graphic artist. We could just grab those people and say, go. Because they're all under this sort of visuals umbrella. And that is a huge problem for a lot of newsrooms.
Many newspapers in Sweden, and also at times even the radio, offers video, live TV as well. And we have regional newspapers producing 24-hour linear television stations. But you didn't talk that much about. You talked about video, but how important would you guess that video will be in the future for
it's hugely important. I mean, it's treated in terms of our strategy, our digital strategy, it's treated as its own thing. I mean, it's sort of like talking about text or images as its own thing when you talk about video, which is a little strange. But it's, you know, it's absolutely essential that news organizations understand video. But to me, that's kind of the trick we're missing a little bit. If you ask most publishers, if you look at what publishers are actually making off video right now, relative to what they're spending, it's not huge, right? Everybody's looking at the potential of video, particularly for, you know, monetization. It's the biggest potential new ad market or advertising. It's where all the ad dollars are. The problem is most of those ad dollars are going to essentially 2 companies right now. So video is essential, but I think what we need to do is kind of what I was showing up here, is we sort of need to figure out what video means for The Guardian or for Enter News organization here. And I don't think we've figured that out yet. And to me, that's step 1. Step 2 is figuring out how to monetize it.
And how important would you consider social media to be? Do you have like how many people are working with Facebook within your team?
Yeah, so I am absolutely blessed. I mean, I was pinching myself when I got to The Guardian. At the Times, I had 5 people, brilliant, incredibly talented social media team. At The Guardian, I have 14, and that's just in London. There are social media audience people in the US and in Australia, and they are almost without exception, the smartest people in the business. The Guardian, having nothing to do with me, this was just a gift that completely landed in my lap, has built a structure and hired just absolutely incredibly smart people whose names I will not mention here because I do not want them to leave.
Well, your print circulation is almost exactly the one of Dagens Nyheter, which is the leading morning daily here, but your journalistic resources are like 5 times bigger, so there is a potential if you have an English-speaking market. Let's see if we have any questions now. Always the tricky questions. Anyone with questions for Aron?
I got questions in Norway, so I'm just saying. I don't know.
He's challenging you.
Okay,
let me ask you again. 14 people working with Facebook, and you mentioned that most of the money goes to like a couple of companies. Do you consider YouTube, Google, Facebook, do you want to work with them, or do you think that you eventually will have to work against them? And is that even possible for a traditional publisher?
There's really no, I think that's kind of a false choice, and I think publishers don't always think that way, but I mean, I'm not saying anything that isn't echoed throughout the Guardian executive suites. You know, we don't see Google, we don't see Facebook, we don't see YouTube as competitors. That's crazy. If we did, we would be squashed very quickly. We have to work with them. We don't really have a choice in this. And I think the sooner we get over this idea that that we're, you know, in competition with those platforms, the better. What we've seen right now, particularly in Facebook, video travels incredibly well. You know, people have a hard time getting streams. You know,
do you publish video within the Facebook TV player, or do you link it to your own?
Native. We publish it native Facebook. YouTube, we use the YouTube player. Other news organizations like the Times have negotiated different deals with YouTube to do basically a revenue share. And I think at some point you'd probably see us heading that direction. But as of now, the Guardian's main goal is to understand what video means for us, understand what is Guardian video, understand how to build reach, how to build community around video. For example, the series there, the Watch Me Date series, we're trying, this is a big experiment to see if we can build an audience around something that doesn't have a natural place anywhere else on the site. That's the goal number 1.
Whenever someone from The Guardian talks about what you're doing, and there is some executive from the Rupert Murdoch-owned News International within the room, they always raise their hand and they remind the crowd that you are owned by a trust which invests like 300, 400, 300, 400 million Swedish kronor every year in the losses that the Guardian operation makes. And so the question is, what's your take on having the customers to pay for content? Will that eventually be a necessity even for the Guardian, or would it be possible to still continue like now?
Well, I mean, in one sense, and I might, I don't know if I'll get in trouble for saying stuff like this, but what the heck. Just if you do tweet it in Swedish, please. People are paying. When they come to The Guardian and they see premium advertising, they're paying. That's why that advertising, why our CPMs are high. That's why we're able to provide advertisers this audience. So it's not like it's totally free. People say, well, are you ever going to have a paywall? I think The Guardian's been pretty much uniform on that, consistent on that for years, that we would not have a paywall, that it's antithetical to our values, and that we think there are other approaches. We just launched a membership scheme just late last year. I'm actually very optimistic that will work for us. I think The Guardian is the kind of organization, if you look at other examples of those kinds of programs, like National Public Radio, Public TV, Public Radio in the US, they're successful. And I think The Guardian is the kind of organization that could actually make that work. Yes, we are very lucky to have an ownership structure that allows us to do these sorts of long-term investments, to say we're going to lose money for a few years and make an investment in digital and then make it back down the road. But at the end of the day, we can't keep losing money forever, just like any other organization. At some point, that money runs out.
Two other very successful, we have a question soon, but two other successful web operations is BuzzFeed and the Mail Online, the Daily Mail website. How would you describe them?
I mean, BuzzFeed is, I describe BuzzFeed as a targeted missile with a specific audience in mind. It is a beautiful product that was developed from the ground up and tuned to allow the content for which they know there is an audience to find that audience. It's like a homing beacon. It's exceptionally well done. And it's no surprise that their top executive is a data scientist. They also do great journalism. They have a 9-person investigations team in the US. They break news. BuzzFeed's a pretty amazing organization. Mail Online is a slightly different situation. I think they also have made a very clever product choice, although I wouldn't necessarily say they are my favorite news source. They have made some great decisions,
If people will tweet about this in Swedish, could you be more specific why you don't like the mail product?
Well, I mean, it's your typical kind of clickbait. I mean, that's what they're after. And it's incredibly well tuned for that. People accuse BuzzFeed of making clickbait. I don't actually agree. I agree with Ben Smith on this. I think if you want to find a news organization that does clickbait, it's the Mail Online.
Okay, we have a question now. Please present yourself.
My name's Tim Wright. I'm here from a little film company in Gothenburg called Vision Tree Films. I went on the Google Glass date with those two, so just thought.
Did you really?
Yeah, I couldn't resist clicking on it. I say otherwise, my highlight has been the Edward Snowden coverage digitally as well. And the question that Mia and I came here with today, Mia has a documentary on SVT Play for another month. It's selling internationally, but we're kind of looking at the shifting sands of TV and where we'll be selling films in the future. And so our question is, will newspapers look outside for production companies like terrestrial TV stations have looked outside for independent producers of video? And if so, what is it that you find that you can't find in-house that would make you want to pick up the telephone or get on Google and look for a documentary filmmaker or a filmmaker?
Yeah, this is not my area, but I'm somewhat familiar with some of what we're doing. So we do partnerships all the time with outside filmmakers, and particularly with we have an ongoing relationship with the National Film Board of Canada. We've done 2 big projects with them, the 7 Deadly Digital Sins, and we're working on a second really significant project with them right now. So I think, what do we get out of a relationship like that? Expertise. There are storytellers everywhere. They aren't necessarily all in your newsroom. In fact, the vast majority are not in your newsroom. Expertise. I mean, it goes on and on and on. The Guardian is actually a very good example, I think, of how good collaborations like that can work. The Guantanamo Diary collaboration, that you saw up there, that was a great example of something where a book comes to us, a company comes to us, Canongate Books comes to us. It's a great story. There's a great, it ends up being, I know this is cheesy to say, it ends up being very much a kind of a win-win for everybody in a case like that. Access, that was what we got there. We had access to information, we had access to the manuscript, we had access to things we couldn't get any other way. And it turned out fantastic.
Okay, Aron, in a few minutes we will have the Minister of Culture and Democracy, Ms. Alice Bah Kuhnke, here on stage. She's coming directly from a cabinet meeting in Stockholm. Yep. She'll talk about our new media politics. And we don't want to get in trouble with the security police, so we have to take you off stage now. Thank you very much. Give Aron a big hand.
Thanks. Thank you.